This was shot.
This is what the engine would look like in service. Is the saga of the engine in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. What we are trying to do now that it's running, and everything in there is running now, is make it a proper museum. And that, interestingly, looks like it's going to be harder than actually getting everything in there working. So, with your support and by just spreading the information around, tell everyone you know about it that who could not make it here. We hope to make this place a jewel of industrial preservation and also an inspiration to others around the country to do the same thing. Getting on to that note is another such story which happened sort of in parallel with this. Now, Massachusetts has a rich history of metropolitan waterworks, and most of them came to a very sad end. I heard a rumor long before we started the project in New Jersey. And the rumor was, in Woburn, Massachusetts, essentially a borough of Boston to the north and west, only about 10 miles away, there is supposedly a steam engine in a water department just sitting there, and it's kept a total secret, and it's all complete, and everything's perfect. And I said, oh, interesting. So I looked it up. Of course, there was nothing on it at all. And I went to the town library, the town historical society, absolutely nothing. And so after asking around a bit more, I decided the rumor was false, but I chased it for a while, and I left a bunch of phone messages. I went around looking in windows of various water department buildings, looking very suspicious, and this turned up absolutely nothing. So I sat on it for about a couple of years, and then about the time that he and I started the project in New Jersey, I got a phone call from an operator in the Woburn Water Department, which manages the Horn Pond Reservoir you see here and these buildings. And the operator said, oh, if you want to find what you're looking for, meet me at the Woburn Water Department in back of the building at this time on this date. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to either find what I'm looking for, or I'm going to end up at the bottom of the reservoir with a pair of cement shoes. The first thing happened. I went inside the building, and this was in it. And not just the steam engine, but everything. The various pieces of support infrastructure, everything from the instruments to the oil system to the polished, varnished mahogany ceiling to hanging wall clocks to original antique telegraph apparatus to hanging oil-fired chandeliers. And I turned around and said to the plant operator, what is going on here? And he said, oh, well, this is sort of our little secret. Our city engineer has been looking after this for the past 20 years or so, and the city engineer before him did the same thing. This place shut down in 1933, and it was replaced by a 4,160 volt electric motor system. And from that time to this, the building was essentially bricked up, boarded up, but the heat was kept on, the roof was kept maintained, and there were about 8 different scrapping attempts and an attempt to give it to the Smithsonian, which were all resisted by this one person. There are gauges here on the left from 1872, before the engine you just saw was put in, still reading city water pressure. Every tool from the inauguration of the waterworks is still hanging on the wall in beautiful carpentry holders, and in some cases glass-sided cabinets, hanging hand-driven drill presses. It is a completely untouched national treasure. And I was apparently one of the first people they had let in to see it since it shut down. This was in 2016. Now I put a little worm in their ear. You know, it's very easy to scare city and municipality people. So I went there just sort of, oh, I'm interested in history, and I'd like to take some photographs if that's okay, but I didn't tell them anything really else. But before I left, I said, well, you know, what's the situation? Is the future of this machine safe? You know, are they planning to get rid of it? Are they planning to just keep it like this indefinitely? And the plane operator said, oh, well, the city engineer has always wanted to get it running. And I said, oh, well, we could do that. So I sort of left them with some contact information, and I didn't hear back for another year. And then all of a sudden the city engineer called me. And I go and meet him, and it's just, that itself was like stepping back in time. He steps out of the city car, he's chain smoking, you know, he has this old suit on, it's all greasy, and he says, he shakes my hand and he says, oh, let's make this happen. I said, okay, and that was in June of 2018. Shortly thereafter, Mr. Mayor came down, the man on the left in this photograph, and the first thing Mr. Mayor said when he stepped inside this place was, I had no idea this was here. So after we showed him around, he threw his support behind it, and we very quickly set to work. The engine was in essentially working order, except for a few minor details, one of which was the atmospheric valve. This valve is on the exhaust end of the engine, and with a large engine, especially one like this, there is a condenser on the end of it usually, which collapses the steam back into water after it's gone through the machine and been used. And this does two things. It enables you to get your water back to go back to the boiler room in an endless cycle. And in another more important feature is that the collapsing of the steam into water in a closed space produces a significant vacuum. This helps draw the exhaust steam out of the engine and make it more powerful as well as more thermodynamically efficient. This valve would route steam up a chimney to the atmosphere if the condenser ever failed, and because the chimney was never capped, you can see it was full of all kinds of refuse brought in by rain and animals. In fact, there were several dead animals inside it. The first thing to do to one of these engines, if it's sat for a long time, is disconnect all the pieces and get each one moving individually. You do not just want to try to grab the engine by the wheel and make it turn.
That's what happened with Phillips.
Yes, it is, with bad results. So this is dismantling the valve gear, getting every piece disconnected individually very carefully. Because this engine was so perfectly preserved, we wanted to be as minimally disruptive as possible. It's very important because you can hurt these things by wrenching on them too hard. So everything we did slowly and methodically with a lot of oil and a little heat. Everything got disconnected, and once it was, we padded the end of a railroad pry bar and very carefully got each valve, each rod, each bearing moving individually. This was a pretty run-of-the-mill task, and of course before we had attempted that, we filled the engine cylinders, valves, bearings with penetrating oil and let it sit. The clock on the gauge board, which is positively one of the most beautiful gauge boards I've ever seen, is a Chelsea clock, Boston company. I took that off the gauge board and serviced it because we wanted, again, everything to get running, not just the engine. There was a challenge which was more difficult than Phillipsburg. This engine had never had its water end drained properly when it was put out of service, and the plungers and pumps are of a design with internal packing glands, whereas the ones in Phillipsburg and most of the other vertical engines out there are external packing gland. They were absolutely frozen solid, and there was absolutely no moving them at all. So in order to get the engine to move, we had to completely disconnect it from these plungers, and that's what you see going on here. We did a lot of detail work. There was one oiler with a broken glass that from I guess a neighborhood kid threw a rock through the window and hit it, so we took that off to put a new reservoir in it, new gaskets. On the left, my friend Phil Christopher, who was essentially the second guy on the project, is taking off the mechanical oiler, which is a device to feed steam cylinder oil into the internal spaces of the engine when running. All this we took home to rebuild. These are new glasses. Now, you may not know this, but sometimes you can actually go and buy pieces new that fit standard equipment from 100 years ago. McMaster Carr still sells these glass walls and cork gaskets that fit oilers made in 1908. This is repairing some of that. A lot of cleaning had to be done. Of course, with a building that hasn't been really opened for 90 years, a lot of dust will collect, so we went and vacuumed off the entire engine, polished it, cleaned it. On the right is a photograph of the valve arm from inside the atmosphere valve. It was broken in half because the rust jacking had broken it, so I know how to braze cast iron. And while Phil unjammed the valve with heat and picked all the dirt and crud out of it, I successfully repaired the broken valve arms and other cast iron pieces inside it with silver solder at a temperature of approximately 2,000 degrees. This was all done at home. I took the entire valve bonnet home with me and got it working properly and all clean. This being the inside of it, when I got it home, I wish I'd taken a photo of it, but this entire mechanism was encrusted with various types of refuse and you couldn't even tell what it was. That's the thing back together, and you'll see 3 brass plugs. I drilled and tapped those so that the valve could be oiled and steam cleaned without having to dismantle it. This was another challenge. Unfortunately, the boiler house had been scrapped when the station went out of service in the 30s and turned into a volunteer fire department. For some reason, the end of the steam pipe, which fed the engine from the boiler house, was not only cut off, but it was filled with cement. We don't know why, but it was a bit of a chore to get the cement out. So not only did I have to do that, but I had to knock a hole in the wall to access the end of the pipe. So after I had done that, we exposed the pipe end, cleaned it, made a custom flange at the city machine shop so it could be connected to a national pipe taper sized pipe.
Who was the builder of the engine?
The builder, that's an interesting thing. The builder is the Platt Iron Works of Dayton, Ohio. And I personally find that very interesting because there were many builders of waterworks engines such as Worthington, Blake, and others that had divisions in Boston, Massachusetts. So why they got an engine from Platt Iron Works is beyond me. Another interesting thing is that until this time, I had known Platt Iron Works as a maker of small catalog engines, about this big, various small sizes. I had no idea that they built large, high-duty, expensive coreless engines for any use, especially waterworks use. There were very few of them. I've done a lot of checking. This is most probably the last Platt Iron Works coreless left on planet Earth. Yes. This is putting the clock back together with the help of my bird. This is the clock back on. Now I did another thing also, because I love old lights and I like things to be historically correct. I have been collecting antique light bulbs for a number of years. I have 30 or 40 lamps that are in excess of 100 years old and still good, and I decided this was the place to use them. So I screwed all of my carbon filament era bulbs, some of which are in excess of 110 years old, into the sockets. And at the same time, I restored the oil-fired chandelier. So at this point, we had period lighting to work by, which was so nice and so easy on the eyes. And just this nice orange glow to work by. Very, very amicable environment. And that oil lamp is actually fairly common in waterworks of the day. You'd see photographs of waterworks that even with electricity, they would have rows of these beautiful lamps. And to give you an idea, that lamp is about this tall. It's positively gigantic. More of the same. And then another truck with another boiler showed up. I had arranged that. A very kind anonymous donor who Jerry knows brought the check in. Wilkinson Boiler brought us that boiler that parked outside, ran a hose in through the door. The gauges registered steam pressure for the first time apparently since 1933, and we got it spinning. And this went essentially without a hitch. It was just sitting there ready to wake up again. At first the top of the building filled with steam because we had an exhaust flange on that valve that I fixed leaking. After we repaired that, it was fine. On the left you see Jay Corey. He is that city engineer I was talking about who protected this thing with his life essentially. And he was very, very pleased to see this run. On the right are all the guys who came and work on it. My friend Phil Beard here, a guy named Ben Rochelle, my friend Phil Christopher.
And 2 Phils, just to make everything confusing.
Yes, and this is just various shots of this engine in service. That's underneath it in the pump floor. This engine is 3.5 floors tall from base plate to the top of the cylinders. It's quite small. That's Mr. Mayer himself starting the engine. Different photographs of it working. And then I think the next one is a drawing I did. I am currently sort of managing this myself until we can get a 501c3 set up. The building needs roof repairs and window repairs, and I am selling these as prints. And this illustrates the station. I drew this by hand. This illustrates the engine that currently survives, the waterworks facility with its chimney, which has sadly been demolished, the oil lamp, the force main gauges, and on the bottom, the two original engines. This waterworks was created in 1872. It had a Worthington engine, which was a double expansion duplex pump, and a Blake engine, which was a double expansion duplex pump, both made in Boston. The engine that we restored was built in 1908, and unfortunately the two original engines no longer survived. They were scrapped in the 19-teens. This machine is in working order. We're hoping to have it in steam again this year, but the more interested people like you call the town, the quicker that'll happen. To their credit, the town put up with what we wanted to do. They were real sports about it, and these guys are busy and overworked and people we don't like to pester. So the more of these prints we get sold, and the quicker we can fix the roof. We want to make a museum out of this place as well. There is a conservation area around the pond, which has already been sort of turned into a park, and it's quite a nice place to visit, and this will only add to that. And I will show you the video of the machine working. Where is that? Right in here? No, it isn't. Okay. This was the first run. Just a little tidbit, because of the condition of this engine, work took 4 months and approximately $4,000. So this stuff here is not difficult if you do it correctly. It's not a fuss, it's not a big deal, it does not have to cost a lot of money. And my message to the folks at Chestnut Hill is, your engines are in comparable condition, at the very least the Alice and the Levitt. It would be this easy to make them run. I have licensed Massachusetts state steam engineers who would be willing to step up and donate their time to be the legal people in charge when we do it. It's easy. All you have to do is say yes. Estimated in the project 5 years and $25,000. Because of local efforts, we finished in 1.5 years and $4,000 under budget. In which engine? Phillipsburg. It did total being several hundred, but we expected more. Yes, mostly involved in these things for private owners. Yeah, this was, again, we think that townsfolk are certainly doing it because this engine is surrounded by a secured and protected water facility. They didn't hit us with union stuff. They didn't hit us with excessive insurance concerns. We signed waivers and often read. It was incredible.
But what it would take to rig up electric motors on these tanks other point of their history that just vanishes if you do not do that.
Yeah, the entire thing with this is context, and the thing that we sort of rail against, which is becoming more of a problem now, is that you can have all of these machines preserved perfectly, mirror shine, clean, behind ropes, and if they're not running and there's nobody left that knows how to run them, you may as well not have the machine left at all. You've lost the important part. So that's the end of our little presentation.
So thank you all for attending. Are there any last minute questions before we break? Yes, Mary.
Alex and Philip, you mentioned in Massachusetts that you had some licensed engineers wanting to do it at the time, and you mentioned insurance requirements and liability waivers. What was the situation in New Jersey?
Essentially nothing.
Why don't you come up to the microphone?
Yeah. The situation in New Jersey was essentially the site was and still is owned by Warren County. Most of them don't know what's in there. The ones that do don't care. And the site is leased by the New Jersey Transportation Heritage Center. The New Jersey Transportation Heritage Center are the people we went through, specifically one person, Ken Miller, who he was the first person I interfaced with, and he said, go ahead with the project, and we basically did it under the auspices of him being an intermediary between us and anyone else present.
Phillips never really attained a degree of formality by the time we got it running to have much of those concerns established. Basically, establishing all of that is what our next step is. All of it was basically just do the thing, show up, have a good time. Now that it's run, now we set that up.
It's a completely abandoned site.
It is. We wouldn't even know it was there, Pepto. No, it's hidden. It was.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Well, thank you all for attending. Just a reminder, we do have books about the Bethlehem engine here, and I'll be at the banquet, but the other three guys won't, so if you have any questions, feel free to snag them before you go, and we'll look forward to seeing you in Bethlehem next year.